Okay, this is our review for our test on Chapter 13 and Chapter 7. So, in Chapter 13, what I want you to know is two main things that are actually calculations. So we'll talk about those first. One is compound interest. Because the ideas of compound interest can be applied to savings as well as to stocks, to any kind of investment. So when we have compound interest, we have the compounding period. So that can be yearly, monthly, daily, weekly. And so, if it was yearly, that means that the compounding period is once per year. If it was per month, there'd be 12 for monthly. There would be 52 for weekly. And there would be 365 for daily. And then you can also have continuous compounding. So the basic formula says that the amount that you would have after a certain number of time period is equal to 1 plus your interest rate divided by the number of compounding periods raised to the, we'll say, t times the number of compounding periods. So let's just define, and you have to multiply this by the amount that you originally have in your account, P. So P is your original amount. And that would usually be in dollars. And then you'd have R, which is your interest rate. And remember, anytime you use something that's in percent, you can't use the percent. You have to use the decimal equivalent. So this is interest rate. And you want it in the decimal. So if you had 6%, you'd use 0.06. So you take this divided by 100. And this is the yearly interest rate. So they usually do everything in terms of yearly interest rates. M is the number of compounding periods from the previous page. And T is the number of years. So let's just do it. And A is the amount after 2 years. So I'll just give you a simple, I'll give you some simple problems. So let's say I give you $2,000. So I'll say the beginning amount, which is your principal. Your interest rate, we'll say I'll give you in percent, but that means you got to convert it to the decimal form. Let's say we do it monthly. So the monthly period would be 12. It's 12 months per year. And we'll do it for 10 years. So how much do we have after 10 years? So you'll have P, which you're trying to figure out, is equal to 5,000, 2,000. The initial amount plus 1 decimal equivalent to the percentage divided by 12. That gives you your monthly interest rate. And then you raise it to the 12, which is the number of periods per year times 10 years. And that gives you the total number of compounding periods. So what you do is you decrease the interest per compounding period, but you increase the number of periods. So 2,000 times 1 plus 0.05 divided by 12 raised to the 12th. So I have a nice calculator. If you don't have one, make sure you know how to do this kind of calculation. So I get as my answer $3,294.02. Now we don't go any more than cents so we don't go any more than 2 decimal points. So what we'll find out is as the number of as the number of compounding periods increases, the amount you gain for a given number of years increases. Now, there is continuous compounding, and what that assumes is the number of periods go to infinity and the length of the periods go to infinitely small. What this does is gives you the maximum possible amount that you could get. And most savings banks just use continuous compounding, so there's not any confusion. So what it is, it's equal to P times E to the K, and K, well, R, which is the interest rate, yearly interest rate, times, so let me put it in terms of variables. So P E to the R T, because we don't have any, we now have an infinite number of an infinite number of periods. So in our case, we have 2,000. We have E to the decimal equivalent of the interest rate times the number of years. So hopefully you have an exponential on your calculator. E, if you don't have it on a calculator, you can use 2.71828. That's close enough digits. So I do have it on my calculator. So 2,000 times E to the 0.05 times 10. And I should get close to this number, slightly larger. And if I didn't, then I go back and figure out what I did wrong. So I get $3,297.44, which you can see is slightly larger than that, but not a whole lot. Okay, so both of those are very useful formulas to use. The second thing I want you to do is to be able to do the first couple months of a amortization schedule. Amortization, I think that's right. Because this is what is done with your mortgage, with your car payments, with probably if you take out a home equity loan, they'll all be the same arrangement. So what you're given in this case is you're given your initial amount, which is the amount that the loan is. So the initial amount is the loan. Let's say we have $10,000. And again, you do your yearly interest. So we'll say it's equal to 6%, which is the decimal equivalent is 0.06. Let's say you have a payment of $600 per month. And by default, majority of these types of loans are per month. So what I'll do is I'll give you a table and you just have to fill it out for the first couple of months. So we need a column for month, for interest, for payment, for balance, total interest. Well, I'll call it excess. I think that's all I need, hopefully. So I won't fill it out, but you can fill it, put it on your cheat sheet. So you'll put month here. We'll put payment here. And what I'm going to do is put this on one page. Payments, let's say interest. We'll have, I'll say excess. We'll have total interest. And we'll have balance. So at the first month, or the 0 month, you take your loan out, $10,000. And we'll go down to the cents. So after 1 month, you've used that money for a month. So what you're going to do is you're going to calculate the interest on this. So the first step is calculate the interest for the first month. And the interest is going to be equal to the interest rate, which is 6%, I think. Yep, use the decimal equivalent. 6% times the, and you divide that by 12 because you're doing this as a monthly interest rate, and then you multiply by the balance. So that's how I calculate the interest on 1 month of using that money. So I get 10,000 times 0.06 divided by 12. So it's $50. So I put that here, $50. Now my payment I specified, I think, is $600. Okay, so $600. So because I'm paying more than the interest, that's the excess. So I take this minus that. So I'll say excess is equal to the payment minus the interest. So that's $550. The total interest is just, I'm just going to add the interests up from each month. So first month is, the total is just the original amount. And then the balance is going to be equal to the previous month's balance minus the excess. So if you take 10,000 and subtract 550, we get a balance of $9,450 and 0 cents. Now, then you just start over again. So month 2. The difference is now the balance is less. So what we'll do is we'll take this information and we'll just slide it out of view. Oops, didn't like that. That was interesting. Okay, not sure how that happened. Let me just delete it. Okay, so we just start over again. The interest. Well, the interest this month is less because my balance is less. So again, you take the monthly interest rate, decimal form, divided by 12. That'll give you the monthly interest rate. You multiply it by $9,450. And I get $47.25. The payment stays the same. We always have constant monthly payments. So the excess, the amount that I paid beyond the interest, is the payment minus the interest. So I get $552.75. So that's here, $552.70. Something's wrong. Oh, yeah, that's what's wrong. That should have been just 550. I somehow got a little carried away with the fives, so this was 550, not 50. Because this should be larger. Every time you pay off, because you have less interest each month to pay because you have a lower balance, and your payment stays the same, the excess always gets bigger. So finally, your balance is going to be equal to your previous month's balance minus the excess. And I get $8,897.25. $8,897.25. The total interest. So after the first time, you got to add the interest from the previous month, the total interest from the previous month, which was 50. So we're taking this value and we're adding the new interest from the new month, 47.25. So that's 97.25. And then the rest of it's just the same. And that's why these things are so useful for easy to do in spreadsheets. And you can also go online the bottom line is, the important things is the shorter the loan, the less interest you pay. The lower the interest rate, the less interest you pay. So, if you didn't have any other factors, you'd pay off your loan as quickly as possible by having the highest payment. But of course, you may not be able to afford the highest payment. So those are the three calculations that you could do. You can do compound interest with yearly, monthly, weekly, daily compounding periods, be able to do all of them. You can do continuous compounding. I'm not sure if that says compounding. It doesn't look like it. Let me write it. Continuous compounding. In that case, it's the largest amount that you can get for a given yearly interest rate. And it's this expression, e to the RT. And the third case is to do the first couple of entries into an amortization schedule. If you understand how it's generated, then you can look at a big table and you're fine. So what else do we need to know? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you actually fill in the blank questions relating to some of the things that I'm going to kind of summarize here that I think is important. So where do we start with? Well, first thing is investments. There are three basic kinds. There's savings, there's bonds, there's stocks. And they have different return. There's three things you want to look at. We'll look at return, which is how much interest you basically get. You have risk, meaning what's the chances of me losing money? Higher the risk, more likely you are to lose money. But usually that means on average you're going to get a higher return for assuming some of that risk. And then there's the volatility. And that's how much the value of the thing changes with time. So for savings, the return is low, the risk is low, and the volatility is none. Because it's kind of a contract. You know exactly what you're getting. It's always increasing. Bonds, we would say the return is medium, the risk is medium, and the volatility is medium. So bonds are loans to companies to use it for buying equipment in the short term. So you're lending companies money. Savings, you're usually lending people money. And then stocks you're buying part of the company. So you have high risks because you could lose money. Here you could also lose money, but you have less of a chance because there are there's collateral for giving loans, so you might be able to recoup some of the money if somebody were to default on it. Whereas stocks, you're pretty much out of luck if the company goes out of business. The risk is high, so the return is high, the risk is high, and the volatility is high relative to the other ones. So what happens is, so here's one thing I'm going to say, as a person moves closer to retirement, typically they want to reduce their risk and volatility because they're going to need it in the short term, the shorter term. So they want to reduce their risk and volatility, and hence will accept lower return. So one way to do that is to just do it manually yourself, but target date funds. So these are mutual funds, which so the mutual funds which automatically balance bonds versus stocks as you approach and pass your expected retirement date. So the anticipation is the money you put in these accounts, you're not going to touch until you retire and you need the money. So when you're young, you put the money into these accounts, you put it into mostly stocks, which, yes, the risk is high and the volatility is high, but because you don't need the money right away, these become less important. And the important thing is to get as high a return as you can, because if you just put all your money into savings accounts, your money is not going to grow in value enough to make it so that you'll have enough when you retire. So that's what target date funds are. Now, target date funds are usually made up of mutual funds, which are groups of stocks grouped. Sorry, I used the word grouped. Grouped into different categories. And there are categories. So depending upon what you think might give you the biggest return, you might put it into growth funds, income funds. There are all kinds of, and you can study up on those when you get into it. There are kind of a subset of mutual funds which are called index funds, and the index funds buy stock in companies in certain indices. So what that means is like the New York, the Dow. That's a group of stocks. It might be the S&P 500, which is the 500 largest companies. There could be NASDAQ. That's another. So, and there's more of this kind. The advantage of index funds is that you really don't have to think too hard, and one of the biggest advantages is that costs are low, because there's not a whole lot of thought going into choosing the stocks, because they're in these indices that are determined by some other means. So you don't have much of your income that you gain from it going into paying to manage it. So there are mutual funds, there are bond funds, which are, again, they're just a collection of different bond. So bond funds are made up of groups of bonds, which are companies that sell or lend money to businesses. And again, there are different categories, and if you get into it more, you can study that. But in general, you just need to know that there are, instead of just buying one kind of bond, you can buy multiple bonds. And that kind of comes down to diversification. What that means is spreading your money across many businesses and sectors. So business would be something like General Electric, Boeing, IBM. Sectors may be energy, oil, well, oil is energy, manufacturing, banking, real estate. Those are kind of sectors, so that's just kind of grouping them according to the type of businesses. And the advantage of diversification is that if one company goes bankrupt, then you just hold on just 1 second. So if one company goes out of business for some reason or it does poorly, it won't significantly negatively affect your overall return. Whereas if you put all your money in, say, Facebook, and Facebook became something nobody wanted to use, and you'd lose all your money. So, by buying funds in mutual funds or in bond funds, you're already diversifying to a certain extent. These retirement date funds, target date funds, they tend to be also well diversified. So those are the words of wisdom. So write those things down, be able to answer some questions about it. Now you can just buy mutual funds and bond funds, but there are tax beneficial accounts. Beneficial accounts. And the most common ones are traditional IRAs. There's Roth IRAs. And there's 401ks. Or if you go into education, there's a similar one, and I don't remember the number. The key thing here is that you get tax benefits from them. When we demonstrated in class, basically the difference between these two has to do with whether your tax rate is higher or lower when you retire. So you use a traditional IRA when tax rate is lower in retirement, and Roth IRA is if your tax rate is higher in retirement. So most likely, if you're upper middle class, the Roth IRAs may be the better choice because you've been able to save more. A larger percentage of your income is going to the retirement. If you save really well, you could actually be making more in retirement than you made in regular life. That's why you can go on all kinds of crazy trips and buy cars and treat your grandchildren and children to great vacations and cruises or something like that. But if you're, lower income or lower middle class or something like that, the chances that you're going to have a higher tax rate in retirement is probably less, and so traditional IRA would make more sense for that. And this was the one that was initially enacted, and then this one followed. So this one was to encourage people who had less money, encourage them to save. This was added later, so people who had more money could get some tax benefits too. And then you have the 401k, which is, this one's associated with your job, and it's more like a traditional IRA. So this money is going to be taxed at your rate when you retire. The thing is, once you do this, the key thing here is that a lot of times, pretty much all the time, if they offer it, your company will match a certain percentage of up to a certain part of your salary. A lot of times it's 100%. So what they may have is they say they have a matching. That's always what you want to check out. They match 100% saved up to 6% of your salary for the year. So let's say your income. So I may put something like this on your as a number question. So let's say your income is $100,000. Just make it easy. And your 401k match is 100% to 6%. How much will I save if I divert $6,000 from my salary each year? So you're going to save at least $6,000. But if you look at the salary, 6% of $100,000 is 100,000 times 0.06, which is $6,000. So you'll put 6,000 in. The company will put 6,000. So that means you'll have a total savings of $12,000, the sum of the two. So the usual suggestion is, if your company has a matching program, is to save the amount that will maximize the match, which in this case is $6,000, because they'll match it to 6,000. If you did 3,000, they do 3,000. If you did 1,000, they do 1,000. If you do 9,000, they'll still only do 6,000. So let's say you save $9,000. Well, they're only going to match 6,000 of that. They'll match up to 6%. So your total in that case is $15,000. You're still saving more. It's just you're not getting the extra boost from the company. So if you can afford to save $9,000, go ahead and save $9,000. You always should try to save enough so that you can get the match, because that's basically money that you get for free. It's free money. Your salary is increased by 6%. Now, of course, you can't use it right now, but when you retire, you're gonna do it. Okay, and in class, we did a lot of examples of showing how money can build. The key thing here is save as much as possible as early as possible, because the earlier you save it in your working career, the longer that money has a chance to build its value. If you wait till you're 50, 55, you're not really going to gain much from the time that's left till you retire to do that. So it does require delayed gratification. Should I buy that new car, or should I drive my old car for a little bit longer? So I've been good with delayed gratification. I'm getting ready to retire in a couple of years. I don't have a lot of concerns about retirement, so I don't have the stress. So it's worth it. You just have to believe that. And the other things we're talking about here is you'll get choices in your 401k plan, and what you should do at a minimum is you should probably invest in some form that is mostly stocks when you're younger, because that will give you the highest return. You kind of have to somewhat just put the money in there, have faith that the economy is going to not tank, and go from there. As I said in class, I didn't do that early enough, and so I could have had more money. Luckily, I have enough money as it is, so it's not that big a deal. So, and then I put a lot of my money on these target date funds, but the other, we talked about this before, diversification. Don't put all your money in one basket for long-term chance of success. You could make a lot of money by putting your money all in one stock, but you could also lose it. And so that's, depends on how much you want to gamble and what you're willing to accept. If you lose, be prepared to lose, because that can happen to everybody. Okay, let's see if there's anything else that I want to tell you that I'm going to okay, so we didn't actually talk about this in class, but it's my last chance to say something, and I'm going to give you a suggestion here. Term life insurance. Okay, term life insurance is basically, it only pays if you die. And what you want to do is you want to have some kind of life insurance. When you're young, it doesn't cost very much. And that's really when you need it the most. If you have a family and children and you die and you don't have life insurance, they're going to have to fend for themselves. So, if I drew a graph of insurance versus the age, here's 60. We'll start with 25. So you get married, get some insurance. So I get married. So I'm not carrying much insurance when I'm single, because there's really nobody that's depending upon me. You get married, you buy some insurance, then you have a baby, a child, you can increase your life insurance. And then when you get to about 50 or something like that, what'll happen is your premiums will go up. And at this point, hopefully your kids are out of the house or they're in college. And so a lot of times people will just stop life insurance at some age. It just gets too expensive for the benefit. That's what I did when I was about 50 or 55. I just stopped paying life insurance because I had saved enough money. At this point, if you look at your savings here, you don't have hardly any savings, and then you build it up. And so hopefully at this point your savings are high enough that if something did happen to you, your spouse would be able to do okay with what you have. Whereas if something happens here early, you don't have any savings, so you need to compensate for that with some kind of life insurance. And then if you have more responsibility, like kids, you want to get more life insurance, because so they can go to college or get a training or whatever it is, paid for their wedding. But then at some point, it's like with a car. In some ways, you have to buy insurance initially to pay for in case when you're paying your loan. But once the loan's over, then as the car gets older, the value becomes less, and at some point you just get liability, which just means if your car wrecks, you don't get any money for it, but you are covered in case somebody else gets hurt. So there's a point where you change your car insurance, and the same true for life insurance. So don't wait too long. I guess the other piece of advice, which we didn't talk about in class either, is a will. So here's when you should get a will, especially when you have kids. Once you have children, it's time to get a will. 100% chance. When you're getting married, maybe it's not such a big deal, because usually everything goes to your spouse anyway if you don't specify otherwise. And then if you have a second marriage, then a will is really important, because things can get crazy there. Okay, anyway, that is chapter 13 review.